Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY boat repair video here in the workshop. If everything goes according to plan, this video should be the last video in my little rudder building series. Before we get started on the rudder, take a look at what's not here anymore. The fiberglass Dodger that I've been slaving over for the last few months. It is finally at the paint shop, and all I have to do now is just to lean back and wait a few weeks for them to finish painting it. Speaking of things I've been slaving over for the last few months, here is the rudder project. I've got one rudder shell completely finished, and I have the rudder stock back from preservation. I started out making a mold from the old rudder. That was fun and definitely an interesting experience. I'm not sure I would do that again because it was very time consuming, but I wanted to get some experience with mold making. I then used vacuum infusion to make two new spiffy rudder halves. Actually, I had to make 3 new halves because I failed horribly at one of them, but that is just a part of trying new stuff. That is kind of the Cliff Notes version of what's been going on here in the workshop lately, so even if you're new to my channel, you're kind of caught up on this project at least. Here are my 2 rudder halves, or rudder shells, and I've had to make a few modifications. I've added a bunch of extra glass to the areas where the rudder stock penetrates the shells. And then down here, I've had to get a little bit creative to get this flange here on the rudder stock to sit flush with the shell. This is where the rudder attaches to the skeg using this doohickey, and it makes a lot of sense for this plastic surface to be riding up against this flange here rather than on the fiberglass. On the old rudder I used to make my molds from, that flange was embedded pretty deep into the laminate, but I forgot to take that into consideration when I vacuum infused the 2 new rudder shells, so yeah, hence the little bit of fiddling now. If I ever need to build another rudder, I will of course just modify the mold, but I've already got these 2 otherwise perfectly fine rudder shells, and I didn't want to waste them. What I've done here is simply just to cut out a hole that's large enough for the flange in the outer rudder shell, and then laid up a new sort of inner part of the shell. With the rudder stock removed, it looks a little something like this, and now I've got this big area in here that I can fill with some kind of goop like 5200. By 5200, I of course mean the product from 3M called 5200, and that is to be used very carefully. Now this is actually one of the few scenarios where it makes sense to use the stuff, but I think we'll get back to that a little later in the video. As you can see, I've modified the bottom rudder shell right here, but I have still to take care of this rudder shell. I've cheated a little bit and already cut this little piece of laminate here. This only serves one purpose, and that is for me to be able to lay up more laminate on top of this. Before I glass this in place though, I am going to enlarge this opening here to match the flange on the rudder stock, and then we're going to use the rudder stock to line this little guy up. Now, of course, doing it this way does make the project a little less spiffy than if the rudder shells had just come out perfect from the mold, but yeah, it's okay. This opening doesn't need to be a tight fit because it is going to get sealed on the inside. So let's just go ahead and remove this. After a little bit of fiddling around, the rudder stock now fits. And as you can see, if I push this down all the way, the flange is now nice and flush with the rudder shell. I'm going to modify this little guy just a tiny bit so that he actually fits. This should just slide around the rudder stock now. Well, almost just slide, but yeah, this seems like a pretty good fit. I'm going to secure this little guy with a tiny dab of thickened epoxy. A little later today, when that thickened epoxy is cured, I can remove the rudder stock and everything will still be lined up. It is with a heavy heart that I have to share some bad news with you guys. One of the regulars on my little channel here has, unfortunately, kicked the bucket. Oh God, why have thou forsaken me? Mr. Angle Grinder is no more. It took me over 10 years, but I've finally worn out my Makita angle grinder. All he does now is make that rattly noise you just heard and smell really bad. definitely kind of burnt. I can only assume that after having restored one house and almost 2 boats, he got a whiff of what he was in for this summer and decided that it was no longer worth living. Rest in peace, Mr. Angle Grinder. All hail the new Mr. Angle Grinder. Yep, there's not a lot of time for mourning around here. All joking aside, this guy has done a great job. I have used and abused him a lot. Now I just want to see if I can move the dust shroud over to the Bosch Angle Grinder. Nice! I think this will work out pretty well. It is a little bit later in the day and I should now be able to remove the rudder stock. And yep, this little guy stayed put. So all I have to do now is to fill up this gap in here with more thickened epoxy and lay up a bunch of glass here on the inside. Now the little void is completely filled with thickened epoxy, and I've added a little fillet here to make it easier for me to lay up glass over the inside section. Like I said, it would have been a lot more satisfying to be able to pull the rudder shells directly out of the mold and use them without having to make any of these modifications. But at the same time, it hardly seems worth it to make new shells, considering this is the only issue. Once the epoxy has cured, this should be nice and strong. Let's get some peel ply on here so I don't have to do as much sanding tomorrow. It's a couple of days later. I've already gone ahead and pulled the peel ply off, and I've also sanded away the little bit of excess laminate. This is what that area looks like now, and the flange on the rudder stock fits neatly into this little recessed area here. Not a bad fix if you ask me. Besides doing that, I've also gone ahead and constructed a couple of doohickeys. I've got a big doohickey and a smaller doohickey. The issue here is that the rudder stock is so freakishly heavy that if I place it in a rudder shell on the workbench, that shell will deform. Not a lot, but a little bit. Enough that it's difficult for me to line up the 2 shells. I'm hoping I can use my 2 doohickeys to clamp the rudder stock to the workbench so that I have this end of the rudder stock just kind of hanging there. I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but I figured it might be a good idea to add a bit of paper towel to the rudder stock, not really to protect it because this is just some OSB, but to create a little bit more friction. With this end of the rudder stock secured, I should be able to remove my little sawhorse here. This is more or less what I was shooting for. My hope here is if I clamp down on this little guy, there should be a lot of friction on the rudder stock, which means hopefully I should be able to rotate the rudder stock in any way I want. Meaning along one axis, that is, but let's see if this will hold. Something like that. The friction generated by my doohickeys turned out not to be quite enough, so I've gone ahead and lashed down the end here, and now it is solid as a rock. There's a good reason this guy is at a little bit of an angle, although it is going to make my life a little bit more difficult in lining everything up. There's the benefit that I know that there's only one high spot in the rudder, so I'll only need to drill a hole, hopefully, in that one location, and that should allow all of the air to drain out of there, because if I have air that gets trapped inside, well then I will have a void. I saw that last weekend when I did this little test. On this guy there was a hole drilled to get the air out right here, but he was sitting at a little bit of an angle, so some air got trapped up here, which resulted in this void. If I do happen to get some voids inside of the rudder, I don't think it's the end of the world, because if I just drill a hole and rough up this surface here, I can just pour in some more foam and let that expand. But still, it would be easier not to have to do that. I've clamped together the 2 rudder shells, and this is actually the first time I'm seeing the rudder put together. This is pretty exciting. But yeah, as you can see, it's on a bit of an angle, and I've got a surface down here for where I can place my heating mat, and also where I can put a little bit of support underneath the bottom shell. Just a quick little side note. In last weekend's video, I mentioned that I wasn't quite ready to lay up glass. That was because the yard needs to move Athena around a little bit over the next 2 weeks. But turns out that's not all that important because the weather's taken a turn for the worse. Yes, it's snowing. The temperature is hovering just above freezing, and of course that is way too cold to work with epoxy. So it's a good thing I've got my little rudder project to keep me busy. After a fair bit of fiddling around, there has been a slight change of plans. Originally I was going to pour the foam in and then put the top rudder shell on, but I think I'm going to glass the two halves together today, and then we'll pour the foam in from the trailing edge here tomorrow. Of course, I've never done this before, so I don't know if that's a horrible idea, but that's the fun thing about trying new stuff. You get to find out. I mentioned 5200 a little earlier in the video, and this is that stuff. This stuff will create a very, very, very strong bond. So strong, in fact, that if you try to bed any kind of deck hardware or maybe some port lights with this stuff, if you then later on need to remove that deck hardware or port lights, then it's very likely that you're going to peel the gel coat right off of the laminate, and you don't want that. So this stuff is not to be misused. There are a lot of good bedding compounds and sealants besides butyl tape, but that is a vast topic that kind of deserves a video of its own. So for now, let's just forge ahead with the 5200. So why do I want to use this stuff if it's so horrible? Well, first off, it's not horrible. It's just really good at some stuff, for instance, being an adhesive, and really, really bad at other stuff, for instance, letting go of stuff. As a general rule, if you ever need to remove something, do not use 5200. But I think for something like sealing around a rudder stock here, where this is never going to come apart, if this comes apart, well, then I've got a whole host of other problems. For something like this, I think 5200 is a good bet. So let's get the rudder opened up so I can get in there. Seeing as I'm going to seal the rudder up tonight, it is very important that I get everything nice and clean. That includes, of course, both the rudder stock, but also the inside of the shells. I'm confident that this is all as clean as it's ever going to get, so let's go ahead and get this gooped up. I put this little support over here in place to help me line everything up. Now, let's see if that actually works. By using 5200 in these places, I'm hoping I can protect the rudder from water ingress a little bit longer. Now, water is going to get in there at some point, but I'm hoping this will buy me some time. Why not just use epoxy? Well, epoxy is brittle, and 5200 is a little bit more flexible. Or at least, that's the theory. There's plenty of delicious squeeze out, so that's certainly a good sign. I've gone ahead and cleaned up all of the squeeze out. I've got a feeling it would have been quicker for me to put down some masking tape, but yeah, it's done. With the rudder all gooped up, there is one last little thing I want to take care of tonight, and that is to glass the seams on the rudder. I'm doing that primarily to seal up the rudder so the foaming epoxy doesn't go dripping out the bottom of it, and also to help me control the two shells a little bit so it'll be easier for me tomorrow. I might lay up some more glass over this seam next week to strengthen it further. For now, I just want to get the rudder sealed up and strong enough that I can start manhandling it. Because this stuff has all of its fibers along its 0 axis and 90 axis, it's not adding that much strength to that seam. So yeah, I'm definitely going to lay up some more glass next week. The only edge I'm not gonna glass is the trailing edge, because the plan is to see if I can spread that apart to get the foam poured in there tomorrow, but we'll see how that goes. I'm not adding peel ply to this because I am gonna have to sand the entire rudder before I give it a light fairing, and also before I paint it and add cover coat. It's the next day and the laminate I laid up over these seams have cured nicely, but I've made one tiny yet crucial, very annoying mistake. There are apparently two different types of 5200. There is the normal one and then there is a fast cure. The one I've got here appears to be the normal one because, as you can see, the stuff from yesterday is nowhere near cured yet. I am kicking myself for ordering the normal variety because the cure time is apparently 4 to 5 days. And that means I'm not going to be able to fill the rudder with foam in this video. I could go ahead and just dump the foam in there, not knowing how the foam is going to react to the uncured 5200. I think that's a bit of a gamble. And also, if I start moving around the rudder shells are going to move in relation to the rudder stock, which is going to weaken my seal on the entry points. Like I said, I am kicking myself for making such a stupid mistake, and having the rudder just sitting here for the next 4 to 5 days is going to feel like an eternity. But at least I can go ahead and get some more of the prep work out of the way. Meaning I can go ahead and build the little box I'm going to use to heat up the rudder to 40 degrees Celsius for 6 hours to post-cure the foam. Ta-da! A box. Very impressive, right? This thing is a little bit fragile, but I only need it to last for about a week. I've joined these sheets of expanded styrofoam by wetting the surface and applying a little bit of polyurethane foam. For something that only needs to last about a week, I think this will do. I can't really test fit the box before I've got the rudder in the upright position, so all I can do is just cross my fingers and hope I didn't mess up the measurements. I'll store the box up here so the dogs don't accidentally mistake it for a chewing toy. It's very important that I have a good idea of the internal volume of the rudder. That'll help me figure out how much foam to pour in there. And I thought the easiest way of figuring that out would be to fill one of the rudder shells with something that's not compressible. So I went out and I bought a bunch of sand. I popped one of the rudder shells back in its mold, then I filled it with sand, dragged the top, and then simply just measured how much sand was in there. Turns out one rudder shell is 16.4 liters. That means the rudder combined is 32.8. That translates to roughly 9.02 kilograms of the foam I'm using. And that is this stuff right here. I've got 15 kilograms just sitting here waiting to go. So literally the only thing I'm waiting for is for that stupid 5200 to cure. I've been looking forward to pouring the foam into the rudder for weeks. So it's really annoying not being able to do it this weekend, but there's always next weekend. Now before ending this video, I want to show you this. Ta-da! The window frames for the Dodger. I got these back from having them anodized earlier this week. The frames look awesome, and I'm sure they're gonna look amazing on the Dodger when I get that back from the paint shop. I don't know when that's gonna happen, but hopefully it'll be soon. And yeah, I guess that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!